I am really excited about tonight because two things happened. I got Dr. Yohuru Williams to join Substack. He's a little busy here in Minneapolis right now and in general with his work. And then once I got you on here, you agreed to go live with me. And I know you are so busy right now on the ground in Minneapolis. But I have so many people asking me what they can do, what's really going on, what the media is leaving out. Like it's hard to really know how to navigate this right now. So, as both someone who lives in Minneapolis and a historian, I was going to start this by saying people always say in rough times, look for the helpers. And I always say, look for the historians. So that's what we're doing tonight.
Couldn't agree more with that because really in moments like this, people want to reflect on the history. It's like, I think people are looking for that for two things from historians. Number one, they want to know if there's some indication about what we can learn from the past that might help us navigate the present. And then secondly, they want to know about outcomes. So particularly in this moment, how can we rebuild or reimagine even as we're going through the thing, right? And I think that's really important now in terms of how people think about how we have hope and optimism, even when things feel very heavy. And here in Minneapolis, which is at this point the Twin Cities and occupied territory, that's very hard for a lot of people.
You call it an occupied territory. Explain.
Well, right now, there are more federal agents in the Twin Cities than local law enforcement. So I think when people think about Minneapolis, St. Paul, they tend to think about this as a major metropolitan area. And the names evoke, thoughts like Prince. And you think about this as kind of a large city. Well, we're not Chicago. We're not Los Angeles. This is essentially a small town with a big city name. And so when you think about the presence of federal agents here, it is totalizing in ways that I think the national media hasn't conveyed. And so if you're here on the ground, you know that the ICE presence is everywhere. And
Yeah.
it's effect on the economy, a chilling effect on people in general. We literally are an occupied territory. It feels like a police state here.
I mean, that's what it looks like from all the different angles that I'm watching it, from my phone, from watch, you know, tuning into cable news, which I know, like, I want to hear your thoughts on how they're covering it. And it's like, it's terrifying. It's terrifying for me to watch because I know you, a dear friend of mine, is there, and other friends of mine, like my friend Carrie. But what's it like? What's it like today? I mean, you had the vigil for Preddy on Saturday or Sunday night, right? I'm losing track of time.
Yeah, it was the killing was Saturday. The day after, this
Yeah.
was incredibly peaceful. And for me, Sari, and I know we talk about this all the time, history doesn't repeat itself, it echoes. And the echoes in the moment are really, really thunderous. It feels for all the world like the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s in this sense. You had this massive peaceful demonstration on Friday, followed by a murder, an execution of a bystander, or I shouldn't say a bystander, an upstander, somebody who was out trying to do his part to keep this community safe. And we all witnessed it. And it's in moments like that. And we can think about this in terms of the lens of like a Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman from Freedom Summer 1964, or a Reverend James Reeb or Viola Liuzzo from Selma, Alabama, of allies who then find themselves caught up in the violence. And hopefully in those moments, it pricked the consciousness of America. In this moment, it's questionable. I mean, we've had other things like this in our contemporary moment that haven't really moved people away from this kind of support of MAGA and 47. But again, the Preddy killing in particular, unlike Renee Good, really seems to have touched a nerve for a host of reasons we could talk about tonight. But it really is, it feels like an inflection point.
Yeah, Tom Johnson just says it does. He was in Alabama during the 60s civil rights movement. And yeah, I was wondering that's the kind of parallel I'm seeing because I think there's this. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what it's like to be in Minneapolis? 2020, you had a major reckoning. You did a lot of work along around that in terms of like law enforcement and trust with community. And that was 6 years ago. And I hear a lot of people saying that so much blood and tears and hard work from all different groups, including yours, which I want you to talk about tonight, was put into patching the community back together again. 2020. We were just talking about this. We started Zooming and documenting what was going on March of 2020, and then you had, of course, the George Floyd summer.
You and
6
I
years.
on
Yeah.
national history education, we did a joint presentation on the history of pandemics and global, kind of global crises that mirrored the moment that we were going into with regards to the pandemic. Little did we know, less than 2 months later, George Floyd would be killed, and there'd be another major reckoning for the nation to deal with. I think the
Yeah.
challenge that most people think about Minnesota as kind of flyover country, right? And so, um, when people think about Minnesota in particular, they might think about the Twin Cities, but one would not have assumed or could ever have imagined that we would be ground central in so many of these important momentous questions that have impacted the United States in the last 5, 6 years. But the reality is that Minnesota is about as close as you can get to the heart of America. All the challenges that you find economically, socially, politically, culturally, anywhere else are here. And it's
Mm.
interesting because Minnesota is also a little bit of a laboratory because we're not Chicago, because we're not Los Angeles, because we're not New York. Things that happen here are far more acute. And so the community feels them in a way, and the nation can sense them in a way. They're a lot more visible and tangible. We think about, for example, all the video captured of Black and Brown people killed by police. And yet there was something about what Darnella Frazier captured here in Minneapolis that became global. And I think the same is true now, although it's fair to say that in our contemporary moment, like as we talk about the ICE surge here and what's happened in the Twin Cities, this is also retribution by the Trump administration against this community. This is part of the president's revenge tour that we've seen manifest in other areas. And we saw that here when the administration attempted to inflict maximum cruelty and brutality on this community by rescinding the federal consent decree a week before, actually the week of the 5th year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd.
Wait, can you tell people about that? I don't know if people who are watching this and will watch this know a lot about that consent decree. Can you talk about that? Because that's really interesting.
Sure, the federal government had negotiated a consent decree with Minneapolis following the murder of George Floyd to really deal with issues of constitutional policing. And ironically, Sari, these are issues that are tied to First and 14th Amendment protections, protections which the Minneapolis police have violated during the Minneapolis uprising. So, for example, there was surveillance of activists. There was a violation of freedom of assembly. And so this federal consent decree was supposed to deal with issues of constitutional policing on the ground. When Trump came in the first time, one of the first things that he did during his first administration was refuse to honor these consent decrees because he said
Okay.
you have to take the handcuffs off police. When he was reelected, Minneapolis and the Department of Justice were in a race against time to finalize that consent decree here. They failed to do so before Trump took office. And so it was really in the hands of the administration to see if they would move forward. They kept kicking the can down the road and they literally waited to 3 days before the 5th year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd to say they were not moving forward with that consent decree. So it was intended to inflict maximum brutality, maximum harm on this community.
What I mean, I think it's probably changing now, but before ICE came in this massive degree, what was the relationship like between residents of the Twin Cities and law enforcement? Like kind of a timestamp before you saw DHS come in. How was the community faring with law enforcement at that point?
It's a great question because really you had this tension that is
Mhm.
present in community, particularly in Minneapolis, around reform in
Yeah.
the department that came with the bringing in, hiring of a new police chief, a new commissioner, essentially of public safety, and then that work has been very difficult here. Now
Yeah.
we have a state human rights consent decree, which dealt with issues of the Minnesota Department of Human Rights and Minnesota state law.
Okay.
We're going to be one of a small number of communities, Oakland, California being the other, that were under both a federal consent decree and a state consent decree. So we
I
still
see.
have that work, and the Minneapolis police have been working toward that. But there have been some ruptures. And so
Yeah.
here, it's ironic because now the Minneapolis police are emerging in a way as model law enforcement, even when here there are many in community who are saying we don't think that the reforms have gone far enough. The pace and the progress are not what some in community feel they should be, and yet at the same time, the local police, the
Mm.
governor, local officials are navigating this interesting moment that feels a heck of a whole lot again like
Yeah.
Civil War Reconstruction, like the Civil Rights Movement, except that the sides have switched. So this time, instead of it being local officials who are obstructionists, it's the federal government that comes in the role of law as lawbreaker.
That is wild. And I actually, you're bringing up history, and you, and my students were so lucky to have you come in before, I guess it was about a week ago, before all of this took place. And you were talking about, you were getting them set for the next unit, talking about immigration and the echoes of immigration restriction and discrimination throughout our history. But something that I did a video about this, and I was thinking a lot about this recently because I just taught Reconstruction, and this idea of thinking about the Fugitive Slave Act, right? And how it was successful, right? In the sense that they were able to bring back a lot of people who ran away back into enslavement, into the bonds of slavery. But, and this is what scares me, so I want you to talk to me about this. It was also successful in waking up the North, right,
Right.
to what this peculiar institution down south actually was, because they were in states like Massachusetts, who passed their own personal liberty laws, they were forced to decide if they were going to comply with federal authorities or not, right? And I love sharing those posters of not just the reward posters, which are just so disturbing to read when I warn my students when reading them, but you also have posters of them like warning colored communities in Boston, they're here.
Right.
So what are your thoughts on all that? And like, it's an echo. We all know what the fugitive slave law eventually leads to. So I'm kind of hesitant to draw that parallel. But what are your thoughts on all that as an expert in all of this?
I really appreciate that question because the parallels are there. And part of what you saw in communities like Boston were abolitionists and anti
Right.
slavery. And there's a difference. For those people who were for the abolition of slavery, there were those people who were simply against the institution. But they all, by virtue of the passage of the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, get drafted into slave catchers because the great conundrum for Southern plantation owners were escaped slaves who would go north, and then there was no federal law to guarantee the return of their property. So they were engaged in hiring what essentially were bounty hunters who would go out and recapture slaves and bring them back. The problem, of course, is that there was no metric to determine whether the people they actually captured were escaped slaves. So you can imagine all the abuse that would be rife in this type of a system. Once the Fugitive Slave Law passes as part of the Compromise of 1850,
Mhm.
now Northerners find themselves in the unsettling position of having a federal law which mandates them assisting or facing criminal penalty for not assisting slave catchers. So it literally brought the issue of slavery to their doorstep.
Mhm.
Avoid it. And ironically, thinking about our contemporary parallel, it essentially made or allowed Southerners to brand Northern anti slavery sentiment as lawless. You're violating the law.
Right.
You're element because you won't return my, as you pointed out, peculiar species of property, to use the parlance of that day. So it's an interesting parallel in that sense. And I think in the same way here in Minnesota, there were those who might have, in some abstract way, supported or agreed with this idea that there needs to be vigorous enforcement of immigration laws. But once it reaches your community and you have to deal with
Right.
what that looks like on the ground, where you're really measuring this in human capital, then that abstract moves to the reality of the law, the system, and its execution.
And I think we're seeing how Minneapolis, the people who don't just live in the city itself, but surrounding suburbs are feeling compelled to come in and be a part of what I'm hearing is just a vast grassroots once again, similar to back to Trayvon Martin, the original Black Lives Matter or the Black Lives Matter movement that came out of that. It's leaderless leader movement. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's something that if we still have history books, will be studied. The just amazing network of community. I'm seeing images of men pulling up in pickup trucks, dropping off a bunch of masks and water, and just pulling out of there and just saying, "Grab it all, see you later." Like, it's this amazing system that seems to be working.
And, it's interesting because we've always seen that in social movements. People
Yeah.
who are, in some sense, activated by what they saw and trying to help in ways that were both tangible, concrete, and sometimes invisible. And so
Yeah.
it's hard to kind of track that commitment and those acts in our modern moment where there's so much cell phone, where we have access and literally an image can go across the globe in literally seconds. The reality is it's harder for people to be anonymous. And so what we're actually seeing is what may have been less visible in other moments. And yet in this moment, it's very tangible because, as you pointed out, this model of a move away from charismatic leadership, people aren't waiting
Mhm.
for a civil rights organization or a charismatic leader to take the reins. They're actually complaining about the lack of leadership in certain spaces, corporate America, among elected officials, and they're then taking on that duty and responsibility to act. And I think that's the interesting thing about this moment.
Yeah, let's talk about that because you wrote a really amazing piece that's your first Substack post here about the CEOs in corporate involvement or non-involvement. I'd like you to speak about that, but I also, if you want to go there, talk to us about the your elected officials. I hear people are saying to me, and they don't know the lay of the land like you do. Why are the senators not on the streets of the people? Why is there not as much visibility of elected officials there? Why are they letting the people fend for themselves? So maybe
Why
first talk about corporations. Yeah, what'd you say? Sorry.
Democrats vote to advance the bill that would allow for the funding of the Department of Homeland
Yeah,
Security to
yeah.
continue advice. So, I think these questions are tangible here. And I think there's this question. Same thing happened with the CEOs here.
Mhm,
Uh,
mhm.
we have to put that in the context of the last 5 years.
Yeah,
Following the murder of George Floyd, a lot of corporations made these full throated commitments to equity, three things: diversity, equity, and inclusion, which the Trump administration promptly criminalized and hinted at criminalization even when the now president, was on the campaign trail, right? To get rid of this illegal DE&I. A lot of those corporations were already looking for an exit ramp from the work they committed to in 2020. And so what we saw even in advance of the president's inauguration were corporations getting off that exit ramp. It didn't help that in his first weeks in office, the president moved aggressively to go after corporations and to make an example of certain corporations. And so then you saw corporations like Target, for example, become the subject of boycotts because people were like, you promised this and now you're going to walk away from work and we're going to hold you accountable. So the corporate leaders here and other places have tried to make the case, and this is the problem. We go back to World War II and Neville Chamberlain and a
yeah.
peace can
Yes.
ease the administration. And they're trying to navigate, or as they say, walk this tightrope. And in one way, we can be generous and say we understand that. This administration has had no qualms about going after big law firms, corporations, universities. So the fear is that the administration, that the president may retaliate against them, as he's done in the media,
Yeah.
legacy media. And at the same time, there's a moral quandary here that business leaders can't escape. It reminds me of Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail to the Birmingham clergy, who said these demonstrations are unwise and untimely. And following the murder of Alex Preddy, we finally got a message from 60 CEOs here who said, we believe that there should be de escalation. Both sides should try to calm the tension, and they're trying to rise above the fray. And I
Uh-huh.
called them out in my piece to say, this is a moral crisis and it requires leadership. If the fear is somehow the Trump administration will retaliate, too late. They've
Yeah.
already put ground zero in this war on decency, on truth, on due process, on civil rights. we're literally watching the architecture of our republic crumble. And if people aren't willing to step up and they're not willing to make a full throated defense of the same, those crumbling pieces are likely not only to crush the people that they don't care about or they see as collateral damage, they ultimately will end up crushing the very foundations of our democracy.
Wow. Yes. And and just the idea of them trying to both sides it and say that the people defending themselves and their neighbors are the same as, I think someone said it's 3,000 DHS ICE agents, whoever they are, descending upon your city, tear gassing, abducting, killing y'all is the same thing. De-escalate on both sides.
It's
It's actually disgusting.
And I think there's a warning for the nation in Pam Bondi's communication following the killing of Alex Preddy, where essentially she says to Minnesota, "We'd be happy to de-escalate. Among other things, we'd like your voting rolls. Like, give us your
Yeah.
voting rolls." So this all feels intended to ensure that it's a continuation of the opening salvo that we saw on January 6th,
Yes.
efforts for free elections, the irony of the United States talking about how Iran should conduct itself in terms of protest there, whereas you're watching literally the abrogation of the U.S. Constitution here in terms of peaceful demonstrations and individuals exercising their First Amendment and Second Amendment rights. So again, I think Americans should be US citizens in particular should be very cautious about being cavalier about this moment because
Mm.
this ultimately, as we pause to reflect on the 250th birth of the United States, is the inflection point about whether we continue to have a democratic republic or it descends into the madness, and it'll be difficult if people don't act now to put this back together again.
How do we put it back together? How do we learn from the echoes of history that are reverberating in our brains right now onto our streets? What lessons can we take from them um, to to preserve our country for another 250 years? Or maybe 5. Like, at this point, I don't know, like, it's hard to imagine this and I feel like, again, I feel like I sound hysterical speaking in hyperbole, but it makes again, find the historians because I think we need helpers right now, but I think we need historians to ground us. So, what do we do? Like, how do we save this? Is my
I'm going
question.
to I know will resonate with you because one of the last times we were together before the pandemic, you and I were at New York Historical Society with the great Congressman John Lewis,
Yes.
your students, and you and I had an opportunity interview him and to talk with him. And he said something to the students that day that has resonated with me, although not directly. He told them that we love to tell young people that you stand on the shoulders of giants, but the reality is you are the giants. We all have the capability in those areas where we have influence to make a difference. We have to choose that because democracy is a practice. Law is a practice, medicine is a practice, and democracy is a practice. If we don't utilize or we simply acquiesce to our rights being taken away, then ultimately what we'll do is lose those rights in translation because the reality is if you don't exercise them, you lose them. But secondly, John Lewis wrote this phenomenal letter, uh,
Yeah.
which was published posthumously in the New York Times
It's
in
beautiful.
Together we can redeem the soul of America. Now, everyone read that and they focused on the part where we said, good trouble, necessary trouble. And my problem is people really needed to read the whole thing because part of what Lewis said is, in order to do that, because the full is, ordinary people with extraordinary vision have the power to redeem the soul of America. And he says, ordinary people develop that extraordinary vision through the study of history,
Mm.
by recognizing that people have been involved in these existential struggles for a long time, so there's much we can learn from the past, by privileging our shared humanity and being global in our outlook in terms of
Mm.
this. So not looking at this in terms of just what's happening in Minneapolis, St. Paul, but connecting it to Venezuela, connecting it to Gaza, connecting it to Greenland, and really then kind of leaning into understanding and appreciating that. And last but not least, understanding that we are stewards and caretakers not only of this democratic republic, but we're stewards and caretakers of each other. And ultimately, we are tied up in what Dr. King called this web of mutuality. It's not
Mm.
abstract to then say that what Alex Preddy did, what Nicole Good did, and I wrote a piece called, "Be Good." It
I'm gonna link to all of these. Your beak. I mean, Dr. Williams has been writing for a long, long time, but I will say your Be Good article, everyone needs to read it. I'm gonna post it and spread it to everyone you know and love because that gave me so much hope.
Thank you.
Sorry to cut you off, but I just wanted to make sure
No,
everyone. Yeah.
I really appreciate that because I think they're modeling for us what Lewis talked about. I also think, and I appreciate this about, again, what we were able to experience with him in space, right?
Yeah.
Lewis didn't leave me in awe. He left me in action.
Yes.
Walking,
Yes.
oh, how great to be in his presence, I felt empowered to act. And people in this moment, whatever you do that may seem insignificant, there's an important bill that's coming up on Friday. Call your congressman, I'm sorry, your senator, and tell them
Yes.
no. As you're seeing people, you mentioned, Sari, folks that are going out and just handing out things to people who are protesting.
Yes.
Even that horn as you pass, all those things matter. They may not seem significant, but you might be bolstering someone's spirit. You're communicating your disdain. You're voting with your feet. Don't support corporations that don't support equality and justice. There are a million ways that all of us can stay engaged. And the lesson in this moment is something that Sandra Day O'Connor said that I'll go back to.
Yeah.
The idea that democracy is a practice. So practice good hygiene and do those things that support people who respect democratic institutions.
I feel like we have hope. I know. I mean, I just felt good getting out there marching in solidarity with y'all on Friday and then Saturday again. Um, yes, there's a big vote on Thursday. We need to get every single senator and a couple Republicans to vote no. And just to some civic awareness, this will not lead to a full shutdown again. It'll just be a partial shutdown. So I don't know what gets shut down, but it's not going to be like the full shutdown that, happened last time, right? It says your internet connection. Are you still there? Oh, we lost him. Hopefully he will come back. Um, but yeah, that I wanna hear your thoughts in the comments. I'm so glad that so many of you were able to tune in and listen to my friend Dr. Williams. I met him on a panel as I'm a teacher in New York City. It's my 24th year, and I think it was probably 2017. I'm gonna try to add him again. It was in 2017 when I first met him. I'm trying to bring him back in because I wanna give you as much time with him as possible. We were doing a panel on teaching about scale and history in the civil rights movement, and I knew his background. One of his expertise is the civil rights. His major expertise is the civil rights movement and the Black Panthers. I did a presentation about teaching about scale. Oh, there you are. Can you hear me at least? Okay, it looks like yeah, we're old. Bill, you were on that panel too. I'm gonna try to add him again too. That was 2017. And we've got, I mean, Dr. Williams has done so much work in helping us with writing and shaping the curriculum that New York City kids get in their classrooms. And he's always helped with that since I've known him. And I think it's so important that we talk to the historians in our local communities, both, local ones, the public historians, because they do give us pathways to how to navigate through these times. It says that your connections, I was just blowing up your spot, Dr. Williams. Um, can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Yeah,
I was saying how Phil's in the chat too, and I was like, the first time we met was probably 2017, if not, yeah, 2017 on a panel about teaching at scale in history. And I was nervous because I picked uh, The Last Great March in the South with Stokely Carmichael and Dr. King, and use that to talk about how to teach scale related to the civil rights movement. And I'm like, who am I to be talking about this with the expert on the panel? We were very gracious and kind. And you were like, you teach that? That's like not in the curriculum. I was like, it should be. I think that's so interesting too, right? Like, even in New York City, if you go through what you're supposed to teach, you don't see Stokely Carmichael in there, and you should, right?
Well, to your point, I mean, that's one of the reasons that we connected. I think that's
Yes.
a concrete example, Sari, of what we mean by people really adopting what Dr. King called creative maladjustment. You have the power of your curriculum. So what you teach and how you
Yep.
share with young people. Now, again, it's a teach by proxy, comment by proximity. I never have to walk in the classroom and say, I'm encouraging you to protest for your rights, but I can teach units that talk
Yes.
about moments in which ordinary people were challenged. And through extraordinary vision, Stokely Carmichael was a student of history. The Black Panthers are students of history. Martin Luther King is a student of history. And I've mentioned all men. The reality is that
Yeah.
the same true of Alice Paul. The same would be true of Angela Davis. The same would be true of Ella Baker.
Yeah.
Biography can be a powerful way to get young people to lean into the fact that what made these people so exceptional isn't because they were superheroes. It's because they led with their heart and they were interested in finding solutions. And they found a lot of those solutions in the development of their brains, right? In education,
Mhm.
being readers and being connected globally. So I think in that sense, what John Lewis offered us was some timeless wisdom that is still applicable today.
Yeah, I didn't do it this year, but I'm going to go back to it. For several years now, it's the first piece of writing I share with my students to frame the not just what to expect from the class, but to get them thinking about why we actually study history. And it's not just to pass the AP exam or pass some Regents test, right? It's to how do we navigate moments like this one so that we have another 250 years of this country that has so much hope, so much potential. Minneapolis is giving a lot of people hope right now, even though you have done your share of leading our democracy in the history of your city. Um, Final thoughts for people, because I don't want to. You have plenty of work to be doing there. Like any way, I guess final thoughts, and also I know a lot of people want to know how to help. Right, like lots of people are posting the very triggering videos of what's going on. I saw there was some chaos around the Hilton where the ICE agents are staying this morning. Or at some point, right? Um, but I also saw that the what's his face is leaving, but Tom Homan's coming in.
Right.
Right?
We're putting lipstick on a pig, as somebody
Yeah,
said earlier.
yeah.
Um, I go back to that article on Be Good, and I think that her name, like that whole people were wearing that pen, Be Good, and most notably Mark Ruffalo. And I
Yeah,
really appreciated him taking that forthright stand in that moment during um, that award show to demonstrate alignment and um, sympathy and empathy with this community. But I also said that it's not just a pen, it's a set of actions. So,
yes.
be good, be good, be courageous on purpose, right?
Mhm.
Um, History doesn't happen to people. People don't wake up and say, I'm going to make history today. People are
Yeah,
first committed to something greater than themselves. And history happens because they're prepared to be courageous and to meet history with courage. Second, that exercise conscience. This is easy, right? There's moral clarity in so many of these issues, and people who engage in both sideisms and try to tell you that what you see is not what you saw. And literally, when you have an administration and someone like a Christine Ohm who make it so cartoonishly obvious by
yes.
literally lying to the American people, it should make it even easier to exercise that conscience. When we think about those other letters, it is grappling with hard history. That's that G, even when it's inconvenient. Because the
Mhm.
reality is, if we don't grapple with the history, we're not going to be in a position to literally then understand and appreciate the ways in which history might help us navigate our contemporary moment. I'm gonna leave the other letters because I really would like people to read that piece.
Oh. Yes,
But I
please
will
read the
say,
piece. And
that just kind of in terms of final thoughts, um, what's happening on the ground in Minneapolis is the fate of the United States if people aren't activated in their communities and recognizing that what we saw in Project 2020, what the Donald Trump promised on the campaign trail, has now become a reality. Everyone is drafted into this fight to preserve the trappings of a democratic republic, because it's only a republic, as Ben Franklin memorably said, if you can keep it. And right now, we're in desperate, desperate danger of losing it.
Thank you so much. I think that's the best place to leave it. If you have any links to share when I post this on Substack and mutual aid or grassroots organizations that we can trust to send money to, I'll put that in here. So just share that with me. And yeah, thanks. We got a lot of people tuning in. I know people are really interested in what's going on there. And please make sure you follow Dr. Williams. And I'm going to link to your article. Everyone needs to read it and share it because that'll inspire folks who are. A lot of people are finally waking up because a white man was killed. I'm just going to
Mm,
name it.
mm,
And good. Now that they're awake, let's activate them. Right? Like they're right. Yeah.
right.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in. If you missed the beginning of this, you can watch it again and share it with all your friends. And thank you so much. Bye
Good to
bye.
see you, Sarah.
Good to see you. Bye.